Well, hello. Welcome back to another review of one of my basses. We're trying a little different setup here. Please ignore the decor. This is the basement bunker. Let's see if I can get some of that out of the shot. There we go. Yes, a little better. There we are. All right, today, the latest installment in me talking about basses I have. I have some interesting and unique little ones. Right now, this is going to be about my Ibanez SRH505F. Okay, what does that mean? Well, Ibanez is one of the top bass makers of the world. They have an incredible array of instruments, a very eclectic mix, actually. This here is based on what is basically the flagship of Ibanez. They call it called the SR now, but the Soundgear. It says right here on the top, Soundgear by Ibanez. Soundgear has been around since the 80s, I believe, is when they started making them. It's what the most basic of Ibanez's designs, and what the heart of the Soundgear is basically it's the shape of the body, which has this long extended upper horn, short lower horn, and then the kind of the rounded lower bout here. I'm not even sure what type of shape this is, but this type of headstock, and what's typically a thin neck. Those are the three main components that make up a Soundgear, and from there are just a multitude of different options that that Ibanez offers. Different body woods, different neck woods, all the way from different pickup type of and electronic applications. They offer everything from the entry level basses around a little over, under $200, all the way up to multi-$1,000 instruments, and they're all based on the Soundgear line, and then they have other lines as well. But that's the whole history of the Ibanez basses. We won't go into. We're talking about one specific one here. This here is considered part of the Soundgear Workshop series. And the Workshop, from what I can tell, it's something that's not, it's a little bit different. It's not a normal, actual, what could be considered a normal, quote-unquote, type of instrument. There's some sort of fanciness or difference about it. In this case here, this is a purpose-built, meant to be very acoustic style type instrument. Like I said, the S stands for the Soundgear, the designation. I'm not sure what the HRF stands for, but the 500 stands for the series, and that's kind of where Ibanez has a 200, 100, or 200, 300, 400 series, 800. They all it's like BMWs. Each numeric series is a different level of quality and whatnot. So the 500 is very professional. It's the 505. The 5 in the second 5 refers to 5 strings. The 4-string version would be the SRH 500. Not to be confusing. So the 505 is the 5-string. The 500 is the 4-string, and the F stands for fretless, which means there are no frets. Which, for those who don't know any better, those are the wire pieces that are inlaid into the fretboard and allow you to stop the string to sound a certain pitch. This one here, the fretless, this fretless here actually has lines that are filled in. The areas where the frets would normally be, there are lines on, which is very common, but this actually, it doesn't look like a lot of manufacturers will make the necks and they slot them all for the frets, and then some they will fill in with frets and some they'll fill in with the lines. This one here actually doesn't look like it was actually ever slotted for the frets. The lines are there for where the frets would go, but it doesn't look like it's actually slotted, because a lot of those other ones there, you get a lot of lifting and the like. I mean, you can kind of feel it here, but so there is some sort of filler in here. I don't know, it's interesting. But from a distance, you can't even really tell. They're very dark. There's a whole lot of arguments that go along among bass players about lined versus unlined and whatnot, and unlined looks better, and you don't need to look at the fretboard and all that, and whatever. Um, the truth be told, I don't mind the line. I mean, if you've been playing an instrument long enough and if you've been playing music long enough, you can hear pitches and you know where things are at. And so you got a decent idea, and playing the same type of instrument, you kind of know where to go. This is a 34-inch scale instrument. I play all different instruments. 34 is the most prevalent scale. The scale refers to the area from here, the bridge, up to here on the nut. And my main six-string bass is a 35-inch. I mean, and I have 30-inch and 23-inch and whatever. But I don't. I mean, again, you play long enough. You kind of you develop what's called a muscle memory, and so you know where to go with the things. But it's you hear and you can play in tune, and it just kind of works. I'm not a good teacher, I guess, in that aspect. I've just kind of I've played fretless off and on for over 15 years. I've been playing bass for about 30 years, so only about half the time on fretless. I did fool around fretless, but really got serious about it about 15 years ago. And there was actually about a 2-year period where I played fretless exclusively, and no one seemed to mind. So I think I'm okay with my intonation and being able to play in tune. But whatever, that's another story for another day. Let's talk more about this bass here. So again, like I said, it's an Ibanez Soundgear SRH505F. And the Ibanez really is an interesting company because they offer really quality instruments. What's called boutique. So not your standard materials are used. I mean, the typical electric bass consists of a body made typically out of alder, a neck made out of maple, a fretboard of either maple or rosewood. Those are your basic woods. This is not basic woods at all. This is very interesting. So first, let's start off with this neck. This neck is very interesting. Let's see if I can get here closer so you can see. You can see the lines here. This is a 5-piece neck, and it alternates between Jatoba and walnut. So Jatoba and walnut. I'm not quite sure what Jatoba is. Walnut obviously is a very common wood. So what a couple things here. What a multiply neck does is it gives you strength. You ever try to, you have a one stick, you try to break a stick, it's easy to break. Put 2 sticks, it's a little harder. 3 sticks, it's harder to break. So it gives a lot more stability. And so that is the main aspect, or that with a multi-piece neck like that, it gives you stability. It doesn't get affected by the weather as much. It's nice and strong and solid. The body, it's a chambered body, so it's mostly hollow. You can hear the hollowness of it. It does have a bit of a thickness to it. And the body itself is made out of wood called okume, which is a wood that gained a lot of popularity. There were some endangered woods and some of the typical woods that were used in instrument manufacture and had been restricted. Some of those restrictions are removed now, but it makes for some interesting things. So the body is what's called okume, and the top is spruce. Sitka, it doesn't say Sitka, but spruce, which is interesting and important because the majority of acoustic instruments, whether they be a stand-up bass, acoustic guitar, those tops are made out of spruce. Spruce is a very common type. I'm not sure exactly of all the attributes of spruce, but it's something to do with the way it resonates and vibrates, and that really gives out a nice acoustic tone. So spruce top, okume body, and then the fretboard itself is a wood called panga panga, which is interesting. From my research, panga panga is very similar to a wood known as wengi, which is a very common wood. That got very popular in the 90s. A company called Warwick makes basses out of Germany. They used a lot of wengi. I guess it's a good substitute for mahogany and ebony especially. So it's basically a hardwood. And a hardwood for a fretboard is what you'd want, because these are pieces of steel that are being pressed against the wood. Steel can wear against wood pretty well, so you kind of want something that is pretty heavy duty. And ebony is a very is a very hard wood. And so the panga panga, which mimics ebony and can be used, I guess, sometimes in replacement of ebony, works well as that type of substitute. So good solid wood. And with a fretless, it's especially important because the metal, I said, is pressing directly against the board. On a regular fretted instrument, the string stops against the steel fret or the nickel fret or whatever material it's made out of. So there's less wear on the fretboard from a traditional fretted instrument, and the frets tend to wear more. So the material of the wood for a fretted instrument, or the material of the fretboard, because there's also composite materials that have been used for fretboards very successfully, is important because it's going to reduce wear. This comes strung from the factory with strings from a company called the Dario, who's one of the top string makers. They're flat wound strings called chromes, which is good for me. That's the type of strings I typically like to use on my fretless instruments. A lot of people like using round strings. Biggest difference between round and flat wound strings is that the flat wound, it just feels like, you know, a bar, a smooth bar. The round you can actually feel the windings, and it gets a different sound. Jaco Pastorius made that sound incredibly famous. Of course, it was also using epoxy and marine epoxy on his fretboard, which added to the sound. But the sound of a round string sounds different than the sound of a flat wound string on a fretboard. I don't know if you can hear the. I don't know if you can hear the unamplified sound of that at all, but we'll get the amplified sound in a second. But that's it gives a very upright players hate to hear this here, but it gives a kind of an upright feel. Nothing near a true upright feel, but it gives a much more acoustic type sound. I'm going to get to how that happens now. The electronics in this, as you can see, typically a electric guitar or bass would have some sort of pickup mounted somewhere between the end of the fretboard and the bridge. Those are basically act like microphones. They tend to be magnetic. They have coil wires and all that. This here uses a different type of technology. And there's debates over how it's actually pronounced. But Piezo is how it's spelled. Piezo, I believe, is actually the way it should be. And what it is, it's just some sort of transducer that picks up the vibrations of the strings and then changes those into sound. Typically, these types of piezos need to have some sort of metallic string in order to work properly. Strings on there's other types of piezos that pick up vibrations differently, but this one here, like I said, I'm pretty sure needs to, I could be wrong, a tape round thing may work on it, but that's typically what it is. So that's where the pickup is here. And then from there you have a master volume and a master tone control. Also though, and it's powered by piezos need an electric source to pick up things. A magnetic pickup doesn't need an external power source. The magnetic field is what picks up the vibrations, and then the magnetic field feeds into the amplifier. In this case here, we do need a amplification system, and what is unique about this instrument, you can see, is right here. This here is the access plate to where the electronics are for the bridge, and you'll see these holes here. There's 5 holes. Inside each one of those holes is a little adjustment pot, a trim pot. So you can adjust individually. You can see plastic still on the screw there. You can adjust individually the volume, the gain from each string. So you can balance out. So if one string sounds louder than the other, you can increase or decrease the volume until the sound of all strings is uniform, which is nice. This is the battery pack. Otherwise, though, it's a very straightforward, simple instrument in that sense. As I mentioned, it's a hollow body. One thing I did not mention is right here, there's an extension of the fretboard where it comes down, and it's very nice. Gives you a nice place to anchor your thumb, which when you're playing, and it kind of helps you mimic more of the upright style. Upright upright bassists tend to anchor their thumbs either against that way or even against like this, I guess, against the fretboard of the fingerboard of the upright bass, and so it kind of mimics that a little bit. Again, like, you know, nothing gives you a true upright experience like an upright bass. One other thing to point out, as I mentioned, you know, that there are fret lines here which help you know where to put your fingers, but there are also side position markers. Now, your typical instrument places the side position markers, as you can see right here. This is in between two of the fret markers, and usually where it happens is that is where the that's on the side that gets carried over. So what you know when you're playing a fretted instrument, that dot is right in between. It's on the odd number frets, starting at the 3rd fret and moving down all the way, and then skips the 11th fret. So 3, 5, 7, 9, skips 11, goes to the octave at 12, and then starts over again on the odd frets. What about the fretless? And see if I can get this angle just right. You can see that it doesn't on the side. The dots on the side do not line up with the dots, the position markers on the fretboard, which is key. This is lining up to where the actual fret is, which from a fretted standpoint, a fretless standpoint, you need to know, because we know that we put our finger here. I am playing what would normally the 3rd position be, which would be a G note, so looking down on the side, I can't see the top of the fretboard, so those fret lines really mean nothing to me, but these position markers are perfect. One of the keys and challenges, anyone who plays a lot of fretless will tell you that, you know, the fret lines aren't too bad, especially if you're doing up here, doing octaves. It really helps to be able to look down. Ooh, off. And you can see the notes and where they're at. So anyway, so that's the overview of the Ibanez SRH505F. Now, how does it sound? Now, I like to use this as on acoustic gigs. Because, you know, it kind of does give a nice feel. It can be used on anything. This is an all-purpose bass. With the piezo setup, it will play through any amplifier. I'm going through my, I don't know if you can see it here, down here, my dark glass Microtubes 500. Not using any of the effects. They got the mids are boosted a bit right now. And it's going through Trace Elliott single 110 cabinets, which are behind me here. Sorry, don't have the best recording studio here. I'm just kind of doing this on the fly. But another neat thing here, which is kind of just a cool little thing, that the knobs here, the control knobs, are made out of wood, which gives it a nice little feel. So it's a very earthy type, I guess, acoustic feel. But let's turn up the volume. We're at full volume and full tone. The action very low, which is where we kind of fretless, you know, it depends. A lot of people on uprights like having the strings wicked high, and it's a very physical and hard thing to do, to actually pull and make sound out of it. With electric instruments, you don't need to have the action as high because the pickup does most of the work for you. In this case here, this is what I like to do because it does a couple things. The less distance the string has to travel to the fretboard, the more likely it is to stay in that pitch. The farther you go, you have to adjust your position actually, because it actually is going to sound sharper. So that's helpful. So having the action as low as you can will help you play in tune better in a position. Plus, you get this nice bloom and envelope to the note sound. That's called wah. MWAH, I guess. It's just kind of, was that onomatopoeia where the word sounds like so the low action allows that really cool different sound to come out with fretless. Now, the problem with a lot of people who play fretless is they fall in love with the and they overemphasize it, and it kind of time and a place. Time and a place. You know, the moi can stick out. I just let the bloom on there. I tend to play, you know, I just play the notes in tune. I play it the same way. fretted, except, of course, there are some other things here where you can slide around the notes, and so you can actually, the same way a guitarist would bend a note a certain way, you can get the same thing here where you can play around with the pitch, and it's also helpful if you kind of miss the note a little bit, you can slide into it, and it's enough where the person listening, you can hear it, and just due to the nature of the way stringed instruments are and all that, they're not actually totally perfectly in tune. And that's another thing I found with Fretless that works out well. I've played with guitarists whose guitars have gone out or whatever, and there was one infamous time playing many years ago. I told Dan the story, I don't know if he remembers it, but his E string had gotten whacked out, and he's playing the chords, and I'm playing along the bass line, so that's the E string on the guitar is the lowest string, it's a B here on the 5-string bass, so typically I need to be in tune with that guitarist's E string because a lot of the bass notes are going to be supporting off that. So I, on the fly, had to figure out, oh, he's there it is. And so I had to be very sure, I had to play off the position so that I could sound in tune with him. So that's a nice thing about fretless instruments here. You can be in relative tune to the instruments around you, which is more important than your instrument being totally in tune, which, you know, nowadays everyone has their own tuner and they're close enough and electronically, and as long as they're calibrated properly, you can tune and everything will be very close. But years ago, everybody used to be tuning to the same thing. Typically, if there's a piano, the piano would be the one would be assumed to be the key center, because that's the hardest one to change. You know, you can't just tune a piano on the fly, so the piano would sound the tune, and then everybody would tune along to the piano. So everybody get their typically off a harmonic or whatever, and then would tune. They'd get the, okay, give me, you know, let's see, your low E or whatever. You tune to the piano, and then everyone tunes, and, you know, there's still videos out there where you can see where the band comes out and they're tuning up. So it's not a case of hitting the stage and going crazy, like, you know, there's a lot of Hendrix videos where, you know, hey, ladies and gentlemen, Jimi Hendrix, and they walk out and you hear them tune. First thing they do is tune. So, and I guess that's just one of the nice things about a fretless is it's easier to play in tune than a non-fretted instrument. Another great thing, you can hear the dog barking in the background there. They're on edge. It's very windy out, and they're guard dogs, so. But anyways, another cool thing that you can do on a fretless bass that people say they can do it on fretted, but I don't know you can, is what's called a slide harmonic. So harmonic, there's little nodes each. They're actually, every spot on the string actually has a different harmonic note, but we're not getting into harmonic theory here, but typically you do it over. The ones that sound the loudest are the 12th fret harmonics and the 5th fret harmonics, but but again, you can do that in any instrument, but what you can do on the fretless that you can't do on others is you can do what's called a slide harmonic, which is just something that just blows your mind when done right. First time I ever heard one of those was on the song Radioactive by The Farm. Tony Franklin, who known as the fretless monster, and he really popularized the fretless bass in rock music. He was the bass player on The Firm, and the entry to Radioactive, he does slide harmonics, and it's like, what the hell was that, is what most people heard. And he does it as a compound type slide. And another, so that if you want to hear what a slide harmonic sounds like on a fretless bass, go listen to Radioactive by The Firm. Right at the end of the intro is where that slide comes in. And another great slide harmonic that you will hear, and it's a compound double stop slide harmonic, is on the intro to Even Flow. Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam is another purveyor of the fretless bass in rock and roll, in a rock setting. And the intro to Even Flow, he ends with, I don't know if I can do this right, a nice compound sliding harmonic where he's on the 5th fret on the A and a D string. So it's a D and a... He does a slide from the 5th to the 10th and the 10th up. Go listen to it. I'm not going to be playing it here because, you know, anyways, that's really cool sound. Go check that out too. As again, that was one of the things like, whoa, what's going on there? I can't make that sound. Well, you need a fretless bass to do it. And from a rock standpoint, I already mentioned Tony and Jeff. Those are two of the big rock fretless bass players. But somebody who doesn't get as much notoriety, but everybody's heard him play, and a lot of his songs were played on fretless, is Boz Burrell from Bad Company. And if you listen to the song Bad Company by Bad Company, the little breakdown there where it goes on, you can hear again him. He's not doing a pinch, he's not doing harmonics, but you can hear him sliding on the fretless, and it's that really cool sound. So from a rock standpoint, those are like the most common and popular. Jeff Ament, Tony Franklin, and but Jack Bruce from Cream, and he's the main reason I got into fretless. I watched the Cream reunion concert and saw him playing, and that's it. I got to get a fretless, and I've mostly always had a fretless ever since then. I used to have a Spectre, one that was very similar to this in style, but a little bit different. But I've gone on quite a bit here. Thank you so much if you've hung out for the almost half hour that I've been on. Song that's done on fretless, believe it or not. If you listen to that with a live, I don't know if I can. He actually has. He's got dirt on it. Wrong fret. Did the wrong slide up there. Screw that up. But anyways, yeah, so any questions, feel free to ask away in the comments. Please like the video if you like it. Like and subscribe. Smash that like button, as they say. I'm just fooling around here. Hey, I got time, YouTube takes off, who knows? It probably won't. But please feel free to interact. I'll be sharing this video on Facebook and other platforms as well. But feel free to ask any questions. I'll be more than happy to answer. If you need a fretless bass player, hit me up. I'll be there to play with you.